Welcome on a Wednesday night to those who like to hide in the shadows and watch movies on a regular basis. Um, we're Generation Movie. My name is J.W. Colwell. I'm phoning home tonight, and also from Loud and Nerdy, the podcast, joined by my estimable co-host, part of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle. Correct,
Among other things. I'm also,
among other things.
a hell of a
No,
Lindy Hopper, so.
yes, you like to swing dance.
Mhm.
I'm much more conservative. You're a stray cat. But welcome on Wednesday night. We're going to talk about one of the all-time classics tonight. We are talking Phoning Home. Oh, I didn't mean to put that. Hold on. There we go.
There we are.
Boom. Is there a more indelible image from the 80s than the bike across the very full moon of a California forest? Spielberg has many films that are beyond good. I'm a devout Spielberg disciple. I always have been. Um, but are there any movies that he has that tie into the themes of childhood and innocence and broken homes and even to the fact of its filming that it's down to scale height for kids. Um, than E.T. Rich, is there a movie like that?
Not that I would say off the top of my head. This does encompass so many things that he's always, gone back to thematically. Um, I mean, right off the top of my head, I'm thinking, a broken home where the father isn't there, which is something, he had to deal with growing up when he was a kid in Arizona. And it's something he still wrestles with to this day. His next film is called The Fablemans, which is he's very much said is about his father. So
Yeah, part of it is the idea that so many and most people don't realize this when they're watching a Spielberg movie. And we'll jump into this with production, but it has a small budget. It's only budgeted at 10 million for the year for the whole thing. Um, and it gets filmed right around the same time as Poltergeist. So he has dueling projects, right? Um, Dueling cast to deal with, finding a way for whatever. But the start of this production, oddly enough, starts on Raiders, right? It starts on Raiders of the Lost Ark because Spielberg is away. He's filming in Tunisia and all over the
mhm.
world for Raiders, and he's a little bit lonely, right? And he kind of sits down and starts talking about loneliness and not being around family and all these different things. And him and Melissa Matheson create this boy's life, which is the original title. They create this movie where they start a script going where they're basically, as they're working on Raiders, they're also working on the script. That's a little bit different from what Spielberg would necessarily view as what he's necessarily viewed as movies he wants to do. Like, because he definitely leans in on the kind of nasty aliens, right? Or things in peril. But this is a childhood story where he just felt a little bit off on the Raider set and just kind of like hooked up with Melissa Matheson, right?
It's a bit of a boy and his dog story, really. Not to downplay that, this representative of an alien race that could travel interstellarly and among the stars and everything by calling him
He's
he's a dad.
He's
But
pet-ish. I would agree with that.
yeah,
He's pet-ish.
there is that kind of a vibe there.
Before we get going, we should say share the link. We appreciate it. We love you for doing it. And everybody at our network, I'm gonna throw the network thing in because it's always good to get that in early. Although I don't know where the hell it is. Can't find it. Forgive me, everyone. By the way, Rich knows about this. I'm fighting the Rona that I've only gotten for the second time. So pair with me as we try to figure things out. But Indiescape Network on YouTube, great place to find content. A lot of good people working and doing all kinds of cool things. CJ Robles has a big He has a big dinner coming up this week at the Texas Chainsaw House with Chainsaw Jerry, which is going to be for charity as well as to celebrate. I wouldn't eat meat if I was going, but CJ's far more cooler than I. But he has a big thing coming up this weekend. Also, if you're looking for other places to find us, you can definitely find us on Facebook as well. We have the Escape Facebook page. A lot of good things going on. We have a lot of really talented guys that are coming together to make a network and work hard. We have Joe Ridgely, who's like kind of like I don't want to see as the emperor because it's that's a little weird, and also which one does he like best? So it's like it becomes a Sith organization kind of thing. But Joe is like how about the circus leader, like the guy under the big top that runs everything? Kind of has everybody everybody the ringmaster. Yes, sorry, my mind's blown, and like I'm 2 hours in on this tonight, and my mind is blown because I'm dealing with the Rona, and my head's like, you ever like sit in bed and just have your head just like give out vibes like it was an ET? Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Probably better as the ringmaster than the the keymaster. So
Well, we have to get these two together. Brandon Brooks says JW and Rich. Hi, Brandon Brooks.
Hi, Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon. I will do my best. Joe runs the freak show, is what Ken says. I don't view us as freaks. I try to say we're freaks and geeks ever since seeing Nightmare Alley, but I understand where you're going with. But so production on ET is everything I'm finding about it, Rich. It's quiet, and it all boils down to casting and the script that comes out of note. Like it comes out of like just it materializes on Raiders, right? And then the cast is the kid casting. So what did you dig up on the production day? Because I can't find anything where there was, we've had a lot of movies where there's like people are fighting about this, or there's not enough budget for this, or Universal hates this, so they have to reshoot it, but E.T. kind of cruises through.
It just happens. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's kind of a very quiet, dull almost production. There's
which
the
is
stories
odd. For Spielberg especially.
Rob Bottin designed E.T. and they were looking for, okay, what do we do, because we need to really concentrate on the eyes because they're very expressive for a character, and that's what's really going to help us sell this as a real creature. And so they went with modeling those eyes off of Albert Einstein, wise wisdom, the wisdom of Albert Einstein, but also that little playful glint that he sometimes has.
And like that's also one of the more interesting side notes that you pick up on the production stuff. So they have this character that Rob Bottin creates, and they have all these things going.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Not Rob Bottin.
Was it Carla Rambaldi?
It's Carla Rambaldi. I don't know why I said Rob Bottin.
Yeah, because I said it, and I don't know why I said it.
You threw me off. It's okay.
Sorry,
I'm okay. I'm in my head as it is. But the other big part of E.T. as a character is Ben Burt, right? Ben Burt is a very talented sound designer that had worked on Star Wars movies, had worked on other Spielberg movies. Joe says hi, by the way. Hi, Joe. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks for the kind words.
Good evening, Joe.
No, thank you, Joe.
Ben Burt is one of those guys who, as a kid, when I'm watching those like making of Star Wars TV specials and stuff like that, he was one of the first kind of like people that wasn't a writer, director, or actor, and that whose name I learned. It was like Ben Burt, John Dykstra, and
Dennis
a couple
Muren.
of Dennis Muren. Yeah, all those guys who were like starting off, building ILM.
All the ILM guys where you go, oh my God, it's amazing.
And I had a chance to meet him once a few years ago, but it was on Father's Day in New York City, and there's like no way I could do Father's Day and then get to my own parents down in Pennsylvania.
Oh my
goodness! I kind of had to pass on that. I was like, argh. But hey, I love my dad, so gotta do dad.
Well, you gotta hang out with the dad. So Ben Burt also does a great job of bringing this character to life. And then you realize they have a sound designer that comes on and basically creates every bell and whistle you hear from E.T. in the movie. And there's all kinds of stories about the actresses that are involved with it. The the actress that was involved was an actress named Pat Welsh, and she was like a chain smoker from Marin County, California. So she had a rascally voice to her. But he also had like 16 other people for all various things. He had Deborah Winger, which again, if you've never heard this story, Deborah Winger is various points E.T.'s voice. It is one of the coolest E.T. trivia facts. If you ask somebody if you can get across that E.T. is voiced by Deborah Winger. But then, he has raccoons, he has sea otters, horses, his sleeping wife, who was sick at the time he recorded her.
Yeah, that's the key to Ben Burtt's magic as a sound designer. He stayed away from like studio tricks, synthesizers that were just starting to come out.
The mundane.
Really concentrated on real world sounds and then juice them in different ways. Like, famously Chewbacca's roar is partly, a Kodiak bear with some other stuff mixed in. The blasters in Star Wars
pew, pew.
are nothing more than guide wires for radio antennas, giant radio transmitter. He went up onto a mountain where there was, a radio station tower and sat there with a microphone and was hitting the guide wires that were holding the tower up with a hammer or a wrench or something to get that kind of that weird little pew thing. And then, of course, he would take that. The Millennium Falcon is famously a broken air conditioning unit that was in the sound studio.
That makes perfect sense in every way.
So everything he did was gather up these real world things, and it all kind of built towards making E.T. feel and sound like an actual organism, that had sentience and could talk and express himself in ways that we could understand without it actually being like English or actual verbiage and things like that. It's an amazing job that he did there.
Yeah, and it's it's one of the major focuses, bringing this character to life. And then the other major focus on Spielberg and the casting and on the production is he has all these kids running around the place. He has Drew Barrymore, he has Robert McNaughton, he has Henry Thomas, and he has various other people, C. Thomas Howell, Casey Martell, Sean Fry, all playing very varying versions of kids in suburbia, right? And he has to pick right. Now, Barrymore, the interesting story about Barrymore from production is she read originally for Poltergeist, right? She comes in for an audition. She auditions for Poltergeist, and he looks at her and he goes, "Your energy," like she was crazy in the interview, like in the audition. She was talking about being in a band, about cooking, and she's told the story on Ellen that basically Spielberg was vibing on her energy, but then said, "But you're not right for Poltergeist." And the thing is, like, and her mother is like disappointed and all this other stuff. But he goes, "I do have a movie I might want you to read for down the line." Right? So she gets cast with this crazy story about giving like this wonderfully energetic and very detailed audition that Spielberg can't use her for Poltergeist. And think about the energy. The manic energy of Gertie in Poltergeist would not work.
No,
it would completely not work, because Carol Ann needs to be kind of like the perfect child of innocence. Gertie is kind of like, she's the one with the quick quotes. Does he eat like a pig? Is he a pig? Because he sure eats like one. Like she's fast.
She's a bit of a demon child.
Yeah,
in a fun way. In a fun way. She's precocious. She's more precocious than Carol Ann would be.
Yes, and so it's this really interesting thing where you get the story, and that's the other thing. The casting is the story in the production, because he had to find kids that would be good on screen, but also the kids that were kind of stepping in, because that's the the secret, like you were saying, is that in this production, he's hiring people that are essentially being de facto Spielbergs. They're being, as Hooper is to a Spielberg, right? We talked about this in our Jaws
Mm-hmm.
show. Um, Elliot and all the kids in the movie kind of represent Spielberg's life, like growing up in a divorced home and all these things. So Henry Thomas came in, and his audition had more to do with the crying sequences and being able to emote, because he
Mm-hmm.
needed an Elliot that emotes. And that's one of the things in the production of the movie that hasn't really, like, we have things in pop culture that are close with kids emoting and kids giving the kind of stuff we want to see. Like the current example would be Stranger Things. We'll talk about that later in Legacy. But the kids emoting, he told it he remembered a dead dog. His dog had passed away, so his emotions coming from, yeah, that's sad. And all the sequences, like, I guess he read from the moments where E.T. was dying in
Mm-hmm.
his audition. So you have this whole wacky, the casting is almost as important as everything else that happens after the casting. Everybody they add with regards to cinematography and editing and music by John Williams, who of course always becomes one of Spielberg's aces, right? But the screenplay is pretty much down pat and right there on the page. Like, and that's one of the things of all these movies we've dealt with in 1982 and the Jaws. This movie has no wonky production stuff, Rich. I couldn't find it, and it's like everything. And you're right, it just happens. And I was looking for it. I was looking for, like, maybe he wasn't on the set enough because he was helping Poltergeist, or maybe he just wasn't, whatever. But all the set stuff and all the production stuff leads me to believe that he was very happy on the set. The set was very happy with him, and everything kind of just right down the line, everything worked into place. The sound effects for ET come online with Ben Burt. The creature gets designed by Carlo Rombati, and it comes down and it works perfectly in meshes. And then they did have some people playing, like some smaller people and some disabled, I should say, challenge folks playing various like moments of the creature. So it's a mix. It's a mix of real makeup and prosthetics and dolls in to create this character and bring this character to life.
Yeah. What's amazing about this movie, while we're still on casting here a little bit, is again all those kids are amazing. There's not a crap performance, even among like some of like the kids who only get a couple of lines. There's still
Greg is great. This is reality,
always,
Greg.
always believable. And the 80s are such a great decade for kid adventures and kid actor movies. Starting kind of here and then going all the way through to things like Monster Squad, Goonies,
Explorers.
Explorer.
I would say to you that the ambition and the wherewithal to get great kid performances is somewhere here, right? And like you hear about like certain performances, like on a movie like The Monster Squad, where the little girl wasn't show Dracula. She met the actor, but she didn't know what she was going to see. So it's like a real. When she screams at the end of the movie, it's real. Same thing with E.T. E.T. was filmed almost in order, so that the kids would be devastated. The kids would be devastated that their little buddy's getting on a ship and leaving. You know what I mean? Like, it's filmed. It's cruel. It's cruel, Spielberg. But it's brilliant in the sense that he knew what he was working with, and he knew exactly how to get the most out of the talent, and that's one of the things that's the most amazing. And like the idea that he had kid performances, Drew Barrymore ad-libs some of her lines. Like there's all these stories, but they're all like super nice stories. There's nothing.
Yeah, like
there's
during
nothing
the
where it
dinner
goes.
scene when she goes, "Alligators in the sewer," when she's
Alligators
repeating
in
that,
the
that was
sewers.
just all her. And Spielberg was just like rolling. The fact that she was, eating the hamburger with a fork was, I think, like just her. and it's instinctual. It's not a calculated actor's choice to to do any of this, because she didn't have that. But thankfully, she comes third, fourth generation of an acting family that's amazing. So there was like some kind of instinctual genetic thing that allowed her to give such a fantastic performance.
Oh yeah, and he talked to Time. I was looking it up. I insisted on shooting the film in complete continuity so the kids know emotionally where they've been the day before, and they pretty much didn't have any idea where they were going the next day. So like real life, every day was a surprise. Drew, Henry Thomas, Robert really believed that was happening to their lives. And that's the one thing you were saying. It is one of the kids' movies from the 80s where everything is right on screen and everything is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's one of the movies where I think when we're talking about legacy later, we're going to talk about the fact that a movie from a kid's perspective, keeping a kid's perspective, that becoming a definitively 80s thing, right? That now in 2022, the definitive 80s thing is Stranger Things because it's basically about the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's very similar in how they view the kids.
Yeah, and in keeping with the production aspect of it, though, how did they get that perspective on that? This is a film being told from a child's perspective, from a kid's perspective. All the camera shots were from lower than normal. They were directly face on for these kids, and
So,
adults.
So Elliot,
if you saw their face, you were looking up, and if you that's if you saw them at all.
Right, and
the school principal, the school teachers, Peter Coyote's Keys guy, never saw their faces
until the end, until you get to near the end, where you do have like all that. But that's only because they're on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a brilliant way to get across that this is a.
That's sort of a moment though. When we start seeing those adult faces, that is sort of a moment where Elliot basically has to face certain facts about life, and he has become an adult in that way. His childhood is over in a certain way because of these circumstances, and that's when we start seeing those adult faces.
And I think, how the kids got the roles, Henry Thomas talking about remembering his pet passing away, Drew Barrymore coming in and basically blowing Spielberg away with her energy, and then him realizing she's not good for this, but she's good for this. And then Robert McNaughton had an interesting thing, and this is also something that kind of goes into legacy, but it is part of the production. He gets cast because he's a really big D&D fan. It is the first movie that has Dungeons and Dragons in a positive light, right? It's an 80s scare thing that's happening at the time this movie's made, but E.T. has D&D is positive. D&D is friendship around a table.
Talking about the 80s satanic panic, definitely, where church groups and concerned parents somehow looked at things like Dungeons and Dragons and other types of fantasy role-playing games and lumped it in with heavy metal, because heavy metal also used magic imagery and stuff like that. It was all bad and evil and coming to stake your souls. It was all bullshit. I mean, I'm lucky. My parents were fairly conservative as I was growing up. Irish Catholic.
How did you occur, Rich?
I'm a complete genetic anomaly.
Black sheep is the word for us.
But they were super cool. They knew I knew how to differentiate reality from fantasy. Probably because they saw me as a movie nerd reading about how movies are made. So I understood that Star Wars wasn't real. And they were really super cool about me and my younger brother playing Dungeons and Dragons with our friends, which kind of surprised me. Especially considering our priest at one point denounced it from the pulpit one Sunday.
Well, and the interesting thing is, doing research, one of the interesting things that you come across on our show when you start doing stuff, I had known about Harrison Ford and it being written on on basically on the set of Raiders and all that other stuff. What I didn't know about the McNaughton that he was an avid D&D player and that's how he got the role. And this is something that came up that I was just shocked with. Melissa Matheson wrote D&D into the script because it was something Ford and her had picked up while filming Raiders. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, Harrison Ford plays Dungeons and Dragons, and somewhere, an angel's getting its wings because that's just the coolest thing ever.
Just when you thought he couldn't be any cooler.
Yeah, the 80-year-old and is getting gas in his Jaguar over the weekend, looking like he's 50. But let's see. Ken writes, Ultimate Kid movie, Stand By Me. Again, this is one of those movies that Stand By Me. This is like a great granddad of Stand By Me. Stand By Me comes about because we can play it as a kid movie and take the kids as seriously as we take adults in film. Let's see. ET phone's home only when changes are not roaming. Wow, what's up, gents? Thanks, CJ, for the joke. We appreciate that. He has very good cell phone service now. I don't know who he's with, but he's got somebody. DD is too deep for the week. That's why I had to retire early. Laugh out loud. Well, the great thing about D&D, CJ, is, and I know Rich knows about this, anybody can be lured into playing again. It's one of the great pastimes. And there are so many things online right now where you can do Roll20 or you can do a bunch of other things, and you can play with people across the world. And then Caesar wrote, good point, Rich. I wonder why so many people get in common fantasy these days, like movies or historical documents. Yeah, I think movies are not historical documents per se, but I will say movies are a great kind of shadow cast of what the genre, what the era they're made in. And the 80s films before this movie didn't take kids all that seriously. And after this movie, kids are all of a sudden taken very seriously. And it allows, we'll get to legacy, but there are so many movies that are tied to this legacy because this movie takes children and innocence and childhood and how children react to adults and how children react to stimuli around them so seriously. We get all the movies that we love from the 80s and a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff that we really love now because it's so out of place because we've again gotten away from the childhood innocence and being able to see the world through the eyes of a kid. We've gotten away from it a little bit.
Yeah, and this is still like the era of latchkey kids. The 70s and the 80s were very much like kids had to be independent to a certain degree.
Yeah, that meme going around about 40-year-old kids that you don't want to mess with, right? Because we had keys when we were 5, we cooked when we were 7. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That joke meme that's going around. Don't mess with the 40-year-old right now.
We weren't tethered to our parents with cell phones. It's a very interesting time, and it certainly forged a generation to do whatever we wound up doing. But it's so movies like this could only exist in the 80s, and that's why when you see like things like Stranger Things now, or even recently The Black Phone, these are movies that rely on kids having a certain degree of independence already to get into the situation.
They're entertainment that's anomalies, but they're anomalies that are created here. This is one of the movies that's the linchpin that, like, if you're dissecting things out on a chart, this movie is one of the movies where the independent kids are so functioning in the society they're living in. And one of the reasons that something like Black Phone hits or something like Stranger Things hits is because we grew up on this stuff. So it's like the moment you get a sense of, I think you and I have talked about it, the 80s kid stuff, cool, right? Like a kid's movie in the 80s, there was danger to them. There were adults that were trying to kill kids. There is a danger that is not present from the aughts on, right? There's a bubble around children.
Next movies is, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and that has some horrific scenes of children being tortured, enslaved, and endangered, and all for our entertainment.
Smacked. smacked really hard. Shorty gets housed really hard. I didn't get to talk to you about this, but I midway got, and we'll talk more, like we'll get to ET as we progress, but there was an Indiana Jones, like one of the cable networks had all of them on, and I inadvertently, I was talking to my wife at one point, I think it was Sunday afternoon, at like 1:30, and then from 1:30 to like 10, I ended up watching all of the Indiana Jones movies, and I didn't even know I was doing it. I kind of just, I drifted into the room, and Raiders was on, and I looked up and I clicked the schedule, and it was like Temple of Doom, and then Last Crusade, and then even Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I think gets a lot of hell. It's not great, but I understand when everybody, but they shouldn't be so angry with it. It's not, we should get over the anger, but I'm just saying that. But so production happens, it's quiet. They cast all the kids. They find a way to create ET. They have a great script that has one screenwriter. I cannot tell you, Rich, how many times we go to the movies, you and I look at my wife and I go, how does this movie have 6 screenwriters? It's a Fast and the Furious movie.
It's story by A and B, screenplay by A writing team and B, and then C and D writing team, based on a novel by so and so.
Yeah, it's just, but this is written by one person. It is one script, and that is a good through line to get into production. Now, it doesn't cost that much to make. Only costs $10.5 million to make.
And just taking a look at the inflation calculator, $10.5 million. How much do you think that translates to 2022?
About 20, I'd say 28.
A little higher, actually, $32.2 million.
But you can't make a movie for $32.2 million right now, Rich.
No.
Even the cheapest blockbusters are $100 million. And we're about to pay. I was just talking about it on my other show. We're about to pay Tom Cruise $100 million for Maverick, because that boy's contract is greater than any contract any star's ever had, except maybe for Nicholson.
There are probably some films out there that spend $32 million on craft services for the shoot. Okay, it's an insane amount of money that they made this movie for. That it looks beautiful, it's just perfect.
There's no waste in energy. It's an hour and 55 minutes. It's lean. It's tight. It's a compressed story that actually has a beginning, middle, and end that you don't have to worry about. And that screenplay, I always look at that screenplay and go, it's one of the great screenplays of all time, in that it knows what it wants to do. CJ writes, there's so many writers now, so now it takes the blame for when the movie bombs. Yeah, but not everything.
I would disagree with that, I would say it's the reverse, because there are so many different writers.
There's nobody, you don't know who the through line is.
Yeah, everybody's to get okay. Take a sidebar here on how the Writers Guild works here for 30 seconds, if you'll indulge me.
I will. Always.
Studios want, certain things in their scripts to appeal to certain people to make the movie as broadly appealable as possible. Sometimes they need to go to a second writer to say maybe goose the love story or goose this aspect of it. Sometimes they'll have people come in and say, can you take a pass and make sure that these ethnic characters are true and not stereotypes? And
snappy dialogue.
All these different drafts are then taken to the Writers Guild for the arbitration of who gets on-screen credit, who doesn't. And regardless of whether you get on-screen credit or you don't, you still get paid. But the on-screen credit helps you get better jobs the next time around. So in order to get an on-screen credit, they have to determine you write so much original material for this screenplay, which is why, some, writers who are like the second or third person on a project will start changing character names, create new scenes and things like that, in addition to what they're supposed to be doing in terms of a polish. And that's to kind of goose their percentage of the work overall in the thing, so they get the on-screen credit so they can raise their price for the next project. And once you start doing that, when these writers are starting to kind of do stuff just to put more of themselves into these things, you're not going to get as smooth as and creatively cohesive piece of writing. It's going to impact,
Other
all
chunks.
of that.
Yeah.
Because suddenly, you have so many cooks going, looking at the stew and the prep chef who did the potatoes go, I made the best potatoes. I'm putting all the potatoes in here. And somebody else is like, I'm putting all the carrots in here. And suddenly, everybody's fighting for that room. And it's more about them and their career than
And not
service
necessarily the stew.
screenplay, which
That's
is
a great point.
an unfortunate side effect of this whole process. And
And
that's
that's
unfortunately why a big blockbuster can just totally be a bomb, because there's no real cohesive thing that holds it together. Like, say, Pirates of the Caribbean, the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, written by a writing team, and that was pretty much it. And you can tell it's just their vision straight through. It's all one voice. Some of the other films where they suddenly get like a couple of other people in there,
gets choppy.
it doesn't feel cohesive at all.
So Brandon writes in
E.T. screenwriter.
Yeah, it's a chef's
Your best work.
Brandon writes movies like Ruskies, Daryl, Monster Squad, Lost Boys, Goonies. Many of those represented how kids who fight back against anything with major help from adults. I think that's one of the defining characteristics of this movie, is that it gives you the skeleton to put other movies on and go, well, how is this movie going to work if we're just doing a kids movie where they're fighting monsters? Well, E.T. works. Or how are we going to do this if a bunch of kids are just trying to find gold? E.T. works. We'll get the kids will all have like their own scenes, and they'll have their own like voices, Yeah.
Well, I don't think it happened this way. I could see where Fred Decker went into the studios to pitch Monster Squad and saying it's like E.T. but with the Universal monsters.
It's possible. I don't think he did, but
because that's a great way to shorthand it to an executive. And they go,
and if you think about it, Monster Squad, Goonies both have the same age ranges. Like, not necessarily. I mean, Monster Squad especially, because we're talking about the age ranges that are all over the place. Monster Squad the kids are big, tall, like they're all over the place. Goonies a little bit less so, with like a younger kid, right? But then we go to the next portion, box office. How does it do? From the get-go, it's not a joke. It has a $10.5 million budget. It opens on 1,103 screens in 1982, June 11th, 1982. It grosses 11.8 million, and honestly, Rich, it never looks back. It just it keeps grinding and grinding, and it grinds everything in the summer of '82 to dust. And it stays like you're looking. It's like I'm using Box Office Mojo to look at this. It's an amazing. The legs is what my dad used to call it, right? The legs of this movie was incredible. It opens in June, and it crunches through. It keeps on like it makes tons of money on July 4th weekend. It makes it goes over 80 million on July 4th weekend. It then July 9th it hits the following weekend. It hits 102 million. So it keeps chugging along, and it's just making money hand over fist. It's in a lot of theaters. It gets more theaters as the summer progresses. Like, it's one of the weirdest, like, it's different from what we see every year, where movies open 4,300 screens and then the screen drops as they go. This was a time when 1,103 screens, a lot of screens. But this movie starts picking up screens. It goes from 1,103 to 1,111, then it goes to 1,279, then it goes to 1,331 around the July weekend. Then after July 4th, it goes to like 1,398. Then in the middle of July, it goes to 1,500. And so it just keeps chugging and chugging and chugging. And when you look at it, Rich, Labor Day weekend of that summer, it's on 1,600 screens. It's at $238 million. And it's not done. It plays past Labor Day, which is usually a death knell for kids' movies and anything. It chugs out all the way. It's playing on over 1,000 screens all the way until November 18th of 1982. And then it drops off to like 900 screens. And Thanksgiving weekend, it picks up screens again, and it grosses another bunch of money. And it plays throughout Thanksgiving weekend and through all the way through almost through December, actually almost through December, where on December 31st of 1982, it picks up. It goes from in the low 800s all the way up to 1100 again for the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes into 83. It goes into 83, Rich. When you look at it, it goes into 83 almost to the day it opens the following year. June 9th, Thursday, June 9th is when it finally ends its run, 530 screens. It ends its run at $353 million. It played for a year in theaters, Rich. A year.
And you know what $353 million comes to in 2022 money?
Hey, give it to me, Rich.
Almost $1.1 billion.
And
so we're talking Avengers Endgame money.
Yeah,
we're talking money. We're talking crazy money.
We're talking. Well, right now this summer, the thing is we're talking Maverick money, but also Maverick is actually too low for it. But the idea, the most fascinating thing about it is, Rich, when you're looking at this, it picks up screens and is consistently grossing hundreds of thousands of dollars through the entire year. And they finally pull it in June 9th is the last day where there's any kind of money for it. 364 days later, $353 million ends its run. It's one of the greatest runs. It played forever. And it kept screens forever. And this was not a time when we had big multiplexes.
No.
These are 2, 3 screen 1, 2, and 3 screen houses. So this is unheard of that you would just throw it over. And then on top of that, Rich, it gets re-released 2 or 3 times. So it releases on June 11th, 1982. It eventually beats Star Wars out as the highest grossing film of all time. It loses its title to Jurassic Park, but it gets re-released in 85 and 2002 to celebrate its 20th anniversary. And Rich, I know you know this, but we're about to have a box office talk about it again because it's coming back. It's coming back in August. And I can't wait because it's going to be in IMAX, and Spielberg oversaw it. And I get warm and fuzzy feelings because I think they're gonna do it justice. But it's coming back to the box office again, so it's gonna get a chance. And I got to tell you, Rich, when you're looking at speaking of box office, this is a box office history that we're talking about. A year in theaters. But what we're going to talk about is from August 5th on this year. August 5th is the last major release until October.
Yeah,
right.
It's
Bullet
August
Train
and September are a desert for new
but
film.
well, they weren't always. They haven't been deserts recently because of the Warner Brothers horror films that have been slotting into the first month. But Salem's Lot got moved. So what I'm going to tell you right now is this August through October this year, we've heard theaters coming back. We've heard all kinds of stuff. E.T. and Jaws might be a helpful way for theaters to stay on top. Because the Jaws IMAX thing is going to be ridiculous. E.T. and IMAX is going to be ridiculous. I think it's an interesting thing that E.T. might get to be a champion 40 years later again. It's not going to outgross anything. It's certainly not going to outgross Maverick or anything that's out. But if it can add, 30, 40 schmeckles to its total in 2022 money, that's not going to hurt. You know what I mean? It's a box office king. It's a champion. And then, I can't stress it enough. A year in theaters, not a lot of movies make it a year. That's just no movies today make it a year. We had movies. We've had movies recently that are doing Maverick is an anomaly. Everything Everywhere All at Once was an anomaly. They lasted, almost 12 weeks in theaters. You know what I mean? They're anomalies, though. They're not something that happened all the time. And E.T. is also an anomaly, but also a different time period. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible box office total.
Yes.
Critical response then and now. It's a hit from the get-go, Rich. It's a hit with kids. It's a hit with people, and then it's also a hit with like, it's a rare Spielberg film that made it to the Cannes Film Festival. Last night of the Cannes Film Festival, Rich.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of Spielberg movies get through there, right?
Yep.
It also becomes a heavy Oscar contender. Spielberg at the beginning of his career had a lot of Oscar contenders. Nothing that he would get towards the middle of his career, certainly. But this was up for 9 Academy Awards, Rich. 9. It was going head to head with Gandhi. And I have no problem saying this. I agree with Richard Attenborough, who said, I was certain that not only E.T. would win, but that it should win. It was inventive, powerful, and wonderful. I make more mundane movies.
Mm-hmm.
Gandhi is mundane.
It's a very fantastic film, and it's kind of like a biopic crossed with like an epic, like a David Lean film. And I think that I think maybe the Academy was just looking at that, going, that was a lot of work, and because we've seen where the Academy has awarded films that are powerful, are well made, but when they look at it and they break down, they go, that had to have been a lot of work, and it came together beautifully. There was a lot of moving parts that could have thrown this thing off the rails, and so for a director to herd this giant thing, this giant beast through, if and I'm kind of say, like, I think that's half the reason why you see at the end of like something like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it's sweeping Oscars. Yeah, yes, the effects work is amazing. Yes, but the overall size of that production and getting that all
three different movies, 3 different Christmases dominating the box office, 3 different. Yeah, but so E.T. wins 4 Academy Awards.
That goes into the Academy voters' thought process.
Yeah, it wins best score, best sound effects editing, that Ben Burt guy again, and best visual effects, the guys creating the E.T. And their critics, like, when you're looking then and now, E.T. is at 99% on Rotten Tomato.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be the rare instance where we need to find that 1%. We need to find who doesn't like E.T. How do you root against E.T.?
I don't know.
That's just weird to me.
I mean, provided they're making an argument in good faith, I'd at least entertain what they had to say. Because I'm like, wow, what did you not see, or what did you see in there that everybody else missed? Why weren't you connecting with it? Because it's very easy to sometimes look at something popular. I know I do it and go, I didn't get it. But to be able to kind of like articulate that into a review, I'd really be interested in like reading.
Okay, I have it. Here it is. Dennis Schwartz. And the blurb on one guy, Dennis, it's one guy, 99%. Dennis Schwartz writes, and this is the main, I can go to the full review, but we're going to read. He gives it a C+, and then he writes, I doubt if the public that fell so much in love with this cute, Disney-like tale had looked too deeply at this religious parable and examined how overwrought and crude it really is. Crude is not a word I associate with E.T. But
I'm thinking he's saying the religious parallels are crudely drawn, or like they could have been done better. But how do you do that without getting too specific and too on the nose and risk, obviously E.T. is the story of Christ. He comes down, he can make things grow, he can heal things, he rises from the dead and then ascends into heaven. Of course it's a Christ allegory. It's even somebody like Zack Snyder, who says his Superman isn't a Christ allegory, before he does this, would recognize that. But how you say that's crudely drawn? How do you better draw this as a Christ allegory outside of, when the scientists have him on on the examination table, they actually nail him down. How do you do that? I don't understand
well, you're
this.
right. I have more. I found the full review.
And I asked for this too. I asked for this, and now I'm aggravating myself.
Yeah, the film dumbs everything down. Sick. Listen to this. E.T. became one of the biggest hits in box office history. I doubt if the public that fell so much in love with this cute Disney-like tale it looks so deeply at the religious parable and examine how overwrought and crude it really is. The film dumbs everything down sitcom style and even reduces the alien mystery to the vulgar, lovable relationship between two children from different cultures. It's geared for the kids and those who are nostalgic about so-called old-fashioned values. The suburban teens rebel by ordering pizza without mom's permission and later help the alien escape. When they're not called on to rebel, we see the teens act obnoxious and play board games like Dungeons and Dragons. So this guy gets I'm going to tell you right now. He gets disqualified because he called D&D a board game. I'm going to tell you right now. So that's one guy. I always found the reviews of ET like I think for the most part everybody gets it. You know what I mean? Like, and most of the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes are all from 2002 or later because they kind of coincide with the re-release in 2002.
So nothing contemporary.
Nothing really. Wait, hold on. Let me see if we can find somebody that's 2013 is the last time we the last bunch, and it's actually a rerun of Gene Siskel's review. It is the kind of film that young people are going to want to see again immediately after they've seen it, and ain't that the truth? So I think Siskel nails it on the head. It's a movie you immediately want to go back to. It's like I said though, 99% is hard. That's hard to pull off. That's hard to pull off on something as horrible as the internet. Anything in the 90s, folks. Like if you get 90% of people they can agree on anything these days. So James Bernardelli, who's a really good critic, on inherent merit, the movie would not warrant such a highly publicized re-release, which this is from 2007. But this is one of those films that transcends what's on the screen. And that's what I think we're going to have again in a couple weeks. We're going to have, new critics come in and new critics find it. And that's one of the, that is one of the lasting legacies of this particular movie, right? One of the legacies of this movie, and I can't find the goddamn banner, Rich. One of the legacies of this movie and franchise viability, which you're going to take in a moment because you have infinite more knowledge and you've written a wonderful piece on FilmBuff Online, which is where your hat sits at. One of the legacies of this particular thing is it's a generational movie. It's a movie that you watch when you're young. Like I had ties with my dad watching this movie, right? He used to say "ouch" every time we would separate when I was a kid, because I would stay with my grandparents for summers and stuff. He'd also say, "I'll be right here." He always pointed to his head. So I have ties there, but I get to show it to a new generation. I get to show it to my nephews, and anybody else that's young enough to want to sit next to me for 5 minutes. And have you ever seen E.T., son? It's like the creepy people from Airplane. But one of the legacies of this movie is that it's an incredible generational thing where you can find something to watch and the kids get excited about it and they don't know it's going to be good and then they find out it's great and their appeal. Like one of the things that's happened recently, Rich, my nephew Jacob, who we go to Universal Studios with, his favorite ride at Universal Studios is E.T.
Oh, really?
Favorite ride. He has all these like Spider-Man, Transformers, Men in Black. He has all these rides to choose from. But E.T. is the one ride we have to go on every single time. And it's transcendent. It's amazing. But give me another legacy piece. Give me drop your knowledge, my friend.
Well, actually, it's more like franchise viability. Because let's face it, before this summer was over, they obviously knew they had a hit. They were making, multiples of what they spent on this movie. You know, the pickup trucks full of money were just backing into Universal Studios left, right, and center. And so they immediately said, we need a sequel. And Spielberg kind of thought about it for a little bit. And he and Melissa Matheson, literally within like a month of E.T. being released, were already, had already banged out a 9-page treatment for a sequel called Nocturnal Fears. The treatment's dated July 17th of 1982. And it basically involves like an offshoot of E.T.'s race of aliens who are more evil and have been kind of at war with E.T.'s alien race for decades. And they also had picked up that distress signal that E.T. had sent out. And basically, when they come down to investigate, Elliot sees the ship, thinks E.T. has come back. He goes running out in the woods, gets captured, and basically it's them waiting for E.T. to show back up at the end and save them. It's really sketchy. It's not great. I mean, the idea kind of can almost get traced back to another of Spielberg's projects that never got made called Night Skies, which was kind of like was originally going to be a follow-up to Close Encounters, but it was kind of like a story of a family whose home is terrorized by aliens, kind of like the movie Straw Dogs or Drums Along the Mohawk, the Henry Fonda Western.
Yeah.
And they started to write this, and they started to come up, and as they were looking at it, they kind of said, you know what, maybe let's not do this. And instead, he kind of went with the E.T. idea, as we talked about before, and kind of shunted that whole family under siege in their home idea over to
Supernatural. Yeah.
Yeah, just added the supernatural, and suddenly it's Poltergeist. And dare I say that? No, I'm not going to say anything then.
Well, no, but I think the interesting thing here is they immediately write a 9-page draft, and what you write about in this Nocturnal Dreams, Nocturnal Fears, I should say, draft. You read it, and it doesn't have ET in it. Not till the very end. And it's like you were saying in your Film Buff Online article. It's very sketchy. Now, also another legacy thing that happened, there was a book that was put out called The Book of the Green Planet, right? That also was released, and you had to send in for it. You had to, like, it was something where it was like in a magazine or something. You had to send in to get the book. But when the books got sent out, it was all about E.T.'s homeworld. Like, the idea that one of the sequels could be, a sequel idea could be Elliot, E.T. coming down and grabbing Elliot, and Elliot going to the Green Planet, which is a little bit what happens in the ride at Universal. But the Book of the Green Planet, the books that came out, the first 50 pages of the books were misprints. So you have all these books that come out, and so if you have the Book of the Green Planet, it's a collector's item. And it's one of those things that was initially thought to be the sequel, but they went away from that. We do have some questions.
But ultimately, E.T. was like, I mean, Spielberg, on the idea of a sequel to E.T., basically said, anything, any kind of follow-up to this movie would do nothing but rob the original of its virginity, which is a hell of an image. Thank you there. And, he also was more pragmatically said at the time, I'm not about to join the Wall Street generation. And yay, I'm glad. I mean, this is a monumental work. It stands on its own. And thankfully, it's one of
the few 80s movies that doesn't have a sequel. Yeah. Like it's one of the few 80s.
It doesn't need one.
It doesn't need it. It's
I love this movie. I've seen it a number of times, and I am perfectly satisfied that that's all we ever see. And this is what pissed me off when, was it last year or 2 years ago? They did that Super Bowl commercial with Henry Thomas and his family. and how he told them all, basically it was like a little mini ET commercial wrapped around, or an
Something.
ET sequel wrapped around a commercial. And I thought that was the most grotesque, soulless, horrible, amoral, awful thing to have ever been done. It's like you're taking one of the great films of the 80s, a film that we have all agreed upon for 40 years, doesn't need a sequel.
Nope.
But oh no, we're gonna do a stealth sequel wrapped around what was it even for? Can't remember what the advertisement was
Wasn't
for.
it T-Mobile? T-Mobile or like Boost
That
Mobile or
feels
something?
right. But the fact that I couldn't even remember what they were trying to, stealthily sell me, I think just speaks to the whole cynical nature of that endeavor. And I really hated that. I mean, I don't blame, Henry Thomas so much. The man's got to eat. Man needs a paycheck.
Well, the funny thing is, Henry Thomas is making a name for himself, portraying characters that you wouldn't necessarily. For anybody who doesn't know, Henry Thomas plays the Jack Torrance character that's now the bartender in Doctor Sleep. It's one of the great, performances where he's completely looks like Nicholson and completely pulls off. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I have
Dr.
no
Sleep
problem with
is
it.
a very underrated film.
Very underrated. And speaking of sequels that didn't necessarily need to be made, but is okay. No, we haven't gotten to some of the legacy
that
stuff.
proves the rule.
Brandon brings up legacy-wise. I have to bring the Harris knockoff ET film. Mac and Me. The McDonald's synchronized dancing scene alone is worth the watch. Yeah, Mac and Me is an awful movie, but it is very well known to Conan O'Brien fans because it is the movie that Paul Rudd always refers to whenever he's bringing clips of his work. Also, Mac and Me would not sniff a theatrical release of DET of Mr. Massamy, which is very true. Joe asked, you guys touch base on what took years for VHS release? So, no, we didn't, but I'm going to bring it up to you now, Joe. The reason it took years for VHS release, twofold. Spielberg was a very big believer in thinking about how Disney practiced his art and how he would release his films out for generations. That's why there was always what's referred to as the Disney Vault, or why it's always referred to as movie. Basically, Disney would re-release a film every 7 or 8 years for the next generation of kids. So Spielberg was very instinctively part of that, and then at some point got whittled down to the point where it was just too much to pass on, and every other movie was coming out on VHS. So eventually he got over it, and then they made a ton of money at VHS. It went crazy at the VHS. We have not talked about the game that killed Atari. There is, of course, the Atari situation, legacy there. E.T. was a game. It was a horrible game. It was very hard, very difficult. I always ended up in the hole, and E.T. can't really get out of the hole because he has to stretch his neck to fly. And it's a mess. But there was a landfill, and there's a very great documentary about the E.T. cartridge landfill.
Yes.
It is a fantastic documentary that's part of this legacy. CJ writes, E.T. No Phone Home. Yeah, there's no need for a sequel. But what I would say is the legacy isn't franchise-based. The legacy for E.T. is all the things that come after it, where kids are valued, innocence of childhood is valued, and you often see these movies that have the same quality with regards to how the children are treated. They're like E.T. cousins. Stranger Things is an E.T. cousin. The Black Phone is an E.T. cousin.
8mm. J.J. Abrams film is a very obvious homage to
Super 8. 8mm is a completely different film, Rich.
Wait, yeah, shit.
Super 8.
Super 8.
Sorry. Different film, Rich. That's okay. I'm brain tonight too. 8mm is a totally different film with Nick Cage. It shouldn't be in the same conversation.
It's like confusing the two movies called Crash.
Yeah, Super 8. But yeah, E.T.'s legacy and franchise viability isn't necessarily an E.T. It's Gremlins and the Goonies and how kids are treated in Indiana Jones movie, Temple of Doom. It's all of these things where generationally through the 90s and 2000, the aughts, and through the teens, 2010s, how kids are treated. If a movie treats a kid with a great respect and whatever, it kind of has a place as like a cousin to ET, and it doesn't necessarily have to be genre stuff. It could be just in how they're treated on screen, how the kids are acting. Like, we have a lot of talk in this day and age about how good are the kid actors we get in some of these movies. E.T. is a direct result. Like, it's arguably Drew Barrymore's best performance. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean that in just that the bond that her and Spielberg had when she was a kid, and before she got like completely taken out of life by just the way she was raised, is one of those things. The kid, if you watch a movie with a good kid performance, I guarantee the first thoughts you have are like, that's a good kid performance. It's like E.T. Or that's a good kid performance like The Goonies. But the Goonies and E.T. are directly related. You get Spielberg and Donner, and you got a suburban movie, and and that's where the viability comes from. It's not necessarily in direct sequels. It's E.T. touched so many lives, and throughout all these generations for 40 years, that all those filmmakers bring the simple elegance of childhood innocence to the table.
And what's really amazing is a majority of those films that you could call, ET's, spiritual descendants are good, at least good, if not great. And
There's
like Mac is like an outlier but Mac and Me feels like it's much more cynical about what it's trying to do. I mean, the obvious thing that one of the commenters mentioned about the McDonald's dance competition and all that stuff. Mac and Me is like horrifically cheap and horrifically cynical about what it's trying to do, and I think
commercialized, completely commercialized.
It fails entirely because of those two things. Whereas all these others get it; they understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to, recapture their own youth or pay homage to how Spielberg empowered kids' characters, children characters.
The movie that greatly encapsulates that, and the movie that is as closely related to E.T. as this film historian and maybe you agree, Iron Giant. The Iron Giant is an amazing grandson or granddaughter, or whatever you want to say, to E.T. It's got similar tropes and themes, and the kids are real, and the bond between the Iron Giant and the child is real, and it's one of those things where you just look at all those things, and that's the true legacy. The true legacy is that Spielberg filmed with kids, got the best performances out of these kids, and took them seriously, and their story is perfectly suited, and he got all of this, and that's the legacy he created. He sent it out to everybody, and everybody watched it when they were a kid. They pass it on to people who are kids in their lives, and it's generational. It's not necessarily
we got a classic film, and then we got numerous films influenced by it that were also great. Like I said, good to great. And that's even better than just direct sequels, I think.
It really is. And if you look at it, it also led Spielberg to very, very much, in a lot of his later films, the kid performances in Empire of the Sun, in Jurassic Park, in any of these movies where the children performances, the child performances, they stand out. The kids in Jurassic Park are the very few kids that you're rooting for not to get eaten by dinosaurs. You know what I mean? Because they that kid is great. The kid is walking around following. Are you going to be in this car? And he gets out of the car and he follows him to the next. Gally Mimus. There's something about Spielberg directing kids where Spielberg understands. Even the kids in and he had it early. The kids in Jaws are very real. You know what I mean? The kids across the table, and I think it's one of those things. I'm going to go back to a comment here. Ken, we're glad you're joining the show. I've never really watched it since the 80s. You should go back. Should we watch it? If you have kids or grandkids or anybody, it is a great hour and 55 minutes.
Yeah.
It won't
Hopefully you will
disappoint.
find that it holds up for you, because it holds up for me. You know, and
Oh,
I'm
and
a
this one,
grump at
yes.
this point.
CJ, think about the
Oh,
performance. AI. That's a
yes.
great choice. Like the performances by kids are Spielberg's true legacy. They're the things where he working with these particular group of kids led him to be able to work with everybody. I would argue Kyo Kwan in Temple of Doom, Short Round is one of the great kid sidekicks in the history of film. You know what I mean?
Mm,
There's so much there. Let's see what else. Last Starfighter, Flight of the Navigator. Flight of the Navigator is a great movie. That's getting brought up a lot. I don't know why. I keep on bringing it up, and other people bring it up. Super 8, Room of the World, and We Can Be Heroes. They're all influenced. They all have pieces of Spielberg inside of them. And this movie was the movie that he realized he could work with kids, which is again, if you're looking at old school Hollywood, kids very, very, a nuisance on set, not really like to work with. But Spielberg took all that energy, put it out on film, and I think when we were talking about production earlier, filming the movie in sequence, where you look at it and you go, they know exactly what they're doing, what's happening from day to day in their lives,
mhm.
is
And
just it's interesting. It's a real interesting because most movies are filmed out of order.
yeah, and just knowing, basics of production, and knowing that, okay, if we're, our story is here, then it goes to here, then we go back to here. You're moving all that crew and equipment to go to your second location to come back, and that can be expensive. And again, this movie was made for a
Inexpensive.
ridiculously low
Yeah.
amount of money then and now.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, and that might be another piece of the legacy, right? You have all these things where ET's on the cover of Time, ET, like legacy things. Spielberg learning how to shoot efficiently, quick, being able to shoot a movie like Schindler's List in the same
Mm-hmm.
kind of efficient way. He learned his filmmaking techniques working really hard, really fast early, and then almost all of his films after a certain point are he makes them in like 2 or 3 months, and they're they're cut and
And it kind of
they're out the
starts
following
here.
year.
It kind of starts here. I mean, we talked about how how Jaws was just out of control because of the difficulties with the shark and shooting on water and everything last week. And then after that, Close
Settle down.
Encounters, I took a little while. Raiders was a tough shoot though, because they were in different locations around the world, and at some point everybody got
Miserable.
dysentery or something,
Yeah.
and were sick. So this, for him to kind of like we said right at the beginning, for him to be able to go through this thing without really any kind of like production gossip or production stories about the making of the film, and the fact that
They're all good. They're all good.
kids,
That's not
man, that could have taken forever. That he was able to get these performances out of them, really
natural.
through his Oh, and we also had before this 1941, which was also famously an out of control production, spent way over budget, and was not a great film. So
I would say part of his legacy is
greater than this, though.
part of the legacy is definitely that he became a controlled, nuanced filmmaker that could do things few could do. But
Mm-hmm.
as we were finishing up tonight, a couple of last comments. Hell yeah, Short Round is a great performance. Yeah, it is. It really is. Like when you watch kid performances, it's one of the absolute tops. And arguably Short Round is better than the Goonies. He's better than he is in the Goonies. You know what I mean? Like so you can see that's the other thing. They're not all all the kid performances are not equal, right? So the interesting thing is told from a kid's point of view, childhood innocence is what the legacy is, the final legacy. Let's see. Ken types in Kid playing the game looks like Henry Thomas. Second, there could have been a sequel if E.T.'s character got on the ship with E.T. Yes, except he gets on a ship with a navigator that happens to be Paul Rubens, also known as Pee Wee Herman. Little known fact. But the finals on this, Rich, it's one of the all-time classics. It's a great movie. It's coming back to theaters, so you're going to get a chance to take your whole family and go see it on the big screen and experience
5-6
it.
weeks.
Yeah, for about 5. Yeah, it's coming soon. And
Yeah, summer's almost halfway over, buddy.
yeah, it's ridiculous. But it stands the test of time. It's an amazing movie. And Rich, I don't know if I told
Yes.
we haven't talked about what's going to be next week, but next week
No, we haven't.
is pretty exciting. I'm going to bring it up. It's going to be the brand. You ready?
Hit me with it, baby.
Boom.
Yes. Yes.
A highly misunderstood and movie that kind of found its place well after its fact.
With not one but two local Northeast Pennsylvania connections, and I will get into both of them next week.
Yeah, but so Tron next week. You forget how great Summer '82 was, but Tron next week. Thank you for joining us today. Where can people find you, Mr. Drees?
All of my nonsense is all collected at FilmBuff Online. My writings, some reviews. Some recent reviews include a documentary on Don McLean's song "The Day the Music Died," which just premiered on Paramount Plus yesterday. I should have had my review of Nope up already, but when I woke up, I saw it last night, and I was kind of on it. And then when I woke up this morning, I had some different feelings that I liked, and that means I had to throw out half of what I wrote when I got home at midnight. So I've not been able to kind of circle back to finish that. I'm hoping to get that done at some point by tomorrow.
We will have to talk about Nope sometime.
Oh, yeah. I'm giving it a strong recommendation now, whereas before it was kind of a wishy-washy recommendation.
So here's the thing. I've refined. On Instagram, you can find me at JW the Movie Guy. On Twitter, you can find me at JWPA Movie Guy. And then on Facebook, I have the Movie Guy, JW the Movie Guy, which is my new page. And then we also have the Loud and Nerdy group and the Loud and Nerdy page. So plenty of places to find us online. Also,
and
go ahead.
Oh, my Twitter is at FilmBuffRich.
Yeah, you were online with everything. I recently got everything into play. So we got some comments, and no way, I can't wait. Yeah, CJ Tron's a big one. Then there's the God Tron. I hated this. Okay, well maybe we can make you a believer, Ken. But here's the thing. So a couple things. Here's the thing, Ken. You're watching the show. What I'm going to say to you, Ken, go watch ET this week. Come back to the show next week. If we're right on ET that you haven't watched it since the 80s, that you might have let it forget how great it is. Come back next week. We'll get you hooked up on Tron. We'll tell you what's important about Tron. And then also Tron has a great sequel that is highly underrated as well. But great show. See y'all next week. Yeah, see you too, CJ.
Thanks, CJ.
You got your big thing coming up this weekend. With the Chainsaw Jerry, everything going on in Austin. Good luck with that, CJ. Good luck with Brandon's show. Brandon's show has a great show called IOU on Fridays. I highly regarded, and he had Jeremy London on last week.
Very good interview, by the way.
It was a great interview.
I was totally wiped, and I couldn't.
I know you were. We got your question in, though. I got your question in, and then I got my question in, and then Jeremy London now follows me on Twitter, which I'm not going to say isn't a lifelong dream, but it's kind of nice. So we got a lot of things going on the network. Join us again next week. Tron next week, boys. Jumping into the computer escape. Have a great night. We appreciate y'all. Stay out of trouble. And we'll see you next week.
Till next time, users.
Yes, users. Oh, wait, hold on. Wait, CJ got something before we go. Touchdown Massacre 1974 cast and viewing the movie in Kingsland, Texas. Free event. Everyone is invited. And celebrate Chainsaw Jerry's 80th birthday, I believe. Have a great time, CJ. We support you. Thank you for joining the show. We'll see everybody next week when we all become users. Take care. Good night.